Infrastructure is sexy.
All right.
So it's an honor to be here with you. Thanks for making time. I'm not sure where to begin. There's so much to talk about, but why don't we talk about what you've built for those people who may not be, cloud customers or network engineers or infrastructure people. What is the scope, the scale, the importance, and the investment? Any kind of numbers you could put behind exactly what Google has built?
Sure. So we run the infrastructure for Google and the Google Cloud Platform, and by now that means billions of dollars every year in capex and opex to run it. We started very small. I'm actually giving a talk right after this where I have some pictures of our history and about the things we learned, which sometimes we learned very painfully. But today it's really, as an infrastructure guy, I say Google is just an infrastructure company with a great UI. And it's totally true, because all our products really are enabled by that. And if you think about Gmail when it came out, had a gig of storage versus 10 megabytes or so, that was enabled by better infrastructure. Or search, the reason why we were able to have better coverage and faster search than other search engines was that we had better infrastructure. So inside the company, it's actually something that we spend a lot of effort on.
So when was the decision made to build all your own stuff and go down the road that you went down? Because there wasn't any path to follow at the time.
That was very early, so early 1999. We didn't really have an alternative. We had relatively little money. Servers were expensive. Data centers were really expensive. You couldn't work around that, so you had to use them. And there wasn't actually a good solution to purchase. So search is such a huge problem that if you try to solve it with traditional answers, which back then was a Sun workstation or Sun servers or sort of things like that, it would cost so much money that our funding would have run out in 2 months and we would have been dead.
Right. That's similar to what I heard about Amazon when you go back to the origin of Amazon Web Services. They were only able to launch such a service because of the work they did on their back end as their store grew. But what makes me wonder is why didn't Google get into the business end of it at the same time? I think they have like a good 6-year lead or something like that.
Yes.
So what's going on with that?
So we did, but we actually went with a different product because we thought that running virtual machines even if it's in a cloud was too primitive to use really. And so what we launched was App Engine, which allows you to really forget about VMs and just write your app, and then the system keeps your app running. And if, for example, your zone turns down or has a problem, it just magically goes somewhere else. And so the only administrative action that you need to perform is to renew your credit card every 2 years, right? But you don't worry about OS version, about zones, about machine types, about anything, right? It just works. And that was actually hugely successful, but it turned out to be too narrow a solution, meaning that it works great for the people that it does work. So for example, Snapchat is based 90%, 95% on App Engine. So it really scales, and they didn't have to re-architect their app from 100 users to 100 million users or wherever they are. But it was too narrow a solution, and so a few years ago, we started to augment it with traditional VMs, now with managed VMs, and with containers.
Which I want to get back to a little bit because that's the new buzzword, but I just got to get a sense from you about what's it like to have gone from being the 8th employee at Google to now. I mean, there's I don't know how many tens of thousands of employees at Google. It's got to be a very different place. How do you get your head around that?
It's pretty amazing, and actually I don't, to be frank. I'm amazed we made it this far, and we had plenty of chances to fail, and in a few cases came pretty close to it.
Can you talk about some of those?
Well, a year after we were founded, the bubble burst, and it was basically impossible to raise any funding. And we were profitable on a incremental search basis, but not overall. So we were slowly draining our cash and trying really very hard to reduce our infrastructure costs, to reduce sort of all costs, the run rate, in order to get to the point where our volume is high enough so that the incremental margin on every query actually pays for the company.
Right.
And you know, we made it fine, but I think this was, you know, within a year of not working. So like, had we taken one more year, that might have not worked out.
Wow. And there's also a lot of decisions along the way that at the time seemed outrageous or outlandish, like buying YouTube, which may be the first unicorn. I don't know, they've only were around about 18 months or less, and Google paid $1 billion something, and it wasn't making money. There was no revenue, really. Was there something to the infrastructure play that you knew about in advising Larry and Sergey, like, you know what, just buy it, and I'm gonna drop their costs by 80% within the first 6 months?
That was definitely part of the equation. You know, in order to make something like YouTube viable, you need to be able to be self-sufficient at scale, right? So the revenue needs to pay for the OpEx, and you know, advertising revenue is nice, but it doesn't. You know, it's not like a subscription business where you get $100 a person per year or something like that. And so that means your OpEx really, your cost per video must be very low. And so we knew that we could do much better than. They actually were pretty scrappy, so like they actually tried, but they didn't have something that scaled. And so very quickly we separated YouTube as a business into YouTube, the website and the product, and then YouTube the back end. And so YouTube the back end we did as an infrastructure project. So we built a large CDN, we do the transcoding, et cetera, but then YouTube as a business runs basically independently and is really its own entity, so to speak.
Okay.
And I had fun reading lots of analyst reports at the time who predicted that, it's costing Google $1 billion a year to run YouTube.
Right. Never make money.
Yes, exactly. That's right.
And now I think as an asset, it's probably worth like $30 billion or something.
I'm an infrastructure guy.
So there's just so much to talk about. So the size of Google now, the amount of money it has, doesn't that have any kind of negative impact on creativity? You know, the old saying is that creativity, to be truly creative, you need constraints and scarcity to come up with breakthrough thinking. Do you ever find like there's a certain amount of laziness or let's just do it because we have the money, and it's not always the smartest decision?
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse. A curse, as you say, because you can't afford to be lazy, and I think you have to really manage that, specifically, and that's actually where that's really a culture question, right? And fortunately, we've spent a lot of time on hiring really good people, and they are motivated by accomplishment, not by having an easy life. And so that's one safety net. The other one is that it is a blessing too, because for the first 2 or 3 years at Google, we couldn't really do anything ambitious because it was really about surviving the next week. And so that constrains your horizon so much that you actually have to make one compromise after another just to solve the problem of the day. Right. And with a little bit more self-generated money, you can actually really change the world or change the world of infrastructure. So all of the really key infrastructure pieces that we created and talked about started in 2002, 2003, and that's not an accident because it takes you 18 months or whatever to actually have the first results, and we really couldn't afford to start on an 18-month project until sometime in 2002.
And when the advertising engine started
when you actually had the funding and the time and the people to actually not just work on a problem of the day, but on something that will change the world, but only 2 years from now, right? And not today. And so for the next 2 years, you're not going to get a return.
Okay. So speaking of changing the world, I mean, the data centers are an enormous industry now, and I think they're the largest, if not one of the largest, consumers of electricity in this country and around the world. I saw something that was like the amount of kilowatt hours consumed by data centers is the same as 2 or 3 New York cities at once. Obviously, there's efficiency is a goal. Google's done pretty well, Facebook's done pretty well, but there's all these other players out there that we don't talk about and don't hear about where it's a lot of hosted cages and it's a tremendous amount of waste.
Yeah.
So what are you doing about helping them out? Is that a business? Could that be a business for you?
Yes, potentially. So we publish a lot about our efficiency work. We can't really do consulting because that's not a business we want to be in. Yeah. But it's true that the overall state of, let's say IT as an overall industry, by which I mean hosted applications for someone, is pretty abysmal from an efficiency perspective, both because at the top end you have low utilization typically in most jobs, and then at the bottom end, the way you run the equipment is very inefficient, has a huge amount of cooling overhead, often use twice the energy or even more that the server actually needs for the UPS and the cooling, etc.
Right.
And so the nice thing is that if all of that workload moved to the cloud, the energy savings actually would be dramatic, because we probably run a typical workload, and I'm not making this up, 10 times more efficient than a small business or even a medium business. So for example, the GSA, General Services Administration, switched to Gmail and apps a few years ago, and we did a study, and we saw, I forget exactly the number, was like a 93 or 95% reduction in energy usage for the same application. And it's not that because we have magic technology, but because in our data center, the servers run at 60% utilization and very efficiently powered and cooled, whereas there they had all over the US, they had little servers in a closet, and the servers basically unused and forgotten, but was still consuming energy.
So where are we at in this transition from on-premises to the cloud? I mean, it's pretty early days. It's like something like only 15% or less than 20%?
Much less, much less. I think extremely early, actually. If you look at the publicly available information about like how many servers get sold every year, et cetera,
Yeah.
right? Then you would estimate that roughly about 1% of server-side cycles happen in public clouds today, in all public clouds combined.
1%?
Yes, maybe 2, right?
Wow.
Certainly not more.
Wow.
And more businesses are trying it out, but they try it out for a fraction of their workload. Unless you look at startups, and in startups it's basically 100% market share and for 100% of their IT, but that's really the exception still.
So when are we going to see Google just come out of the gates aggressively marketing, branding, advertising in Forbes, potentially, about its cloud offerings? I mean, because Amazon's getting all the buzz, IBM's trying to get some of that buzz, Microsoft's, you got Satya up there talking about Azure. We don't hear that kind of aggressive, proactive messaging coming out of Google yet.
Yes, we definitely have not turned up the marketing faucet as much, in part because we'd like to convince people by the quality of the product versus the quality of the ad.
That's never how it's been done in technology, you know that, right?
It actually has worked in a number of places, but the other thing is we're actually growing very quickly, and we're having trouble keeping up, and with the demand, and so we want to, like, you don't want to turn on a faucet and then people come to you and are disappointed.
Right.
But I'm very happy with actually how things are going, and one reason is that I think the next 5 years are going to be much more years of change than the previous 5 years in terms of how the product actually evolves. Containers, right? To say it again, data flow, for example, versus Hadoop, etc.
So, I mean, can you explain how some of that stuff works in a way that that a layman might understand or makes it most interesting?
Sure. What I'm getting at is that in the grand scheme of things, every cloud today, including ours, is at a pretty primitive stage, right? It's really a 1.0 product. You have to worry about machine types and zones and OS images and upgrades and all that kind of stuff. And that's not really actually what you want to do. But we already have the first sort of proof points out for how the world could look like that makes this much easier. And just to give you 2 examples on the compute side, if you package up your app as in a container, then really the cluster operating system can run it for you, and you have gotten rid of a lot of conceptual overhead like OS versions and upgrades and security patches, etc. And that's ready today. That's basically how we've run Google for the last 15 years, pretty much. Though we never used VMs. It's a much more application-friendly way of running things. On the data processing side, we launched publicly what we call Cloud Data Flow. Internally, it's called Millwheel and Flume. That's how we process large data sets, and that has internally replace MapReduce, which was really a great idea.
Yeah.
But it's an idea that was great, more than 10 years ago. And once you start using it at scale, you see where it kind of breaks down and where it makes things more complicated it should be. And we're one step further there. So today, as a data analyst, you can write, a 100-line program that probably would be a 1,000-line program in MapReduce, and it will run faster, and it will the same code will do real time versus batch. So you have just a much better experience, right? And if you extrapolate out changes like this, then you're going to end up 3-5 years from now in a very, very different place than where clouds are, where every cloud is today, including ours. And so I think the history there is really still to be written, and adoption is in the 99% who haven't actually made a choice yet where to put their cycles.
So if as the move to, as these data centers get more efficient and architectures get more efficient, are you still going to need to build and invest and build these giant data centers up in the Arctic Circle? And that we'll still need those, or can you just continue to densify your existing?
I mean, of course, Moore's law, which is slowing down, helps you a little bit. Finding efficiencies yourself helps a little bit, but in the grand scheme of things, if today 2% are hosted in the public cloud and 90% aren't, then obviously the 2%, like those data centers, are going to grow. But they're going to replace much less efficient small data centers, closets, right, et cetera, et cetera. So they may be more visible, but in aggregate, actually, their energy consumption is lower than what they replace.
So what do you think the people on the other side of the table? I mean, Google's famous for doing its own hardware engineering, and not so much the electrical engineering, but the networking, storage, some of the storage. What is the message in all of that for the big legacy IT players? Cisco's, HP, Dell, EMC. Are they toast? I mean, is this like when their biggest customers aren't using them, and all the sexy people went from Wall Street to scale out computer companies like Google and Facebook?
Yeah.
What does that mean for the industry?
So I think long term, I think that could be a problem for them, clearly, because today they're not building products that the large players want to buy, but that could change, right? Intel is building products that large players want to buy, right? So there's definitely an industry there. The second one is, I think, despite, like, I'm hugely bullish on public cloud. Now, it's clearly going to eat up everything, but over time, this isn't going to happen in 3 years. This is going to happen in 20 years, and so there's lots of time actually where you need different solutions. Because if you line up all the people who have compute problems, and over here are the ones who are in the public cloud today, and over here are the ones that run an IBM 360 from 1968 and are still keeping it alive. There's lots and lots of targets along the entire spectrum, and no solution today fits all of them. And we're going to eat it up from the bottom, so to speak, or from this end, but it's going to take quite a while.
Do you think that Google will get into new kinds of apps and services that it's not in now? I mean, radically different things. I mean, we saw them launch and that will tie into your infrastructure. Like we saw the wireless business is sort of in the offing, and the fiber is rolling out to more cities. Does that tie right into your infrastructure, and does it allow you to get into businesses that you weren't in before?
So we provide connectivity for them, etc., but they're really a separate business, so it's not part of my world, because it's a consumer-oriented business. Google Fiber tries to make internet last mile access better, and they plug into our backbone, and from there on, it's my problem. So in that sense, having this infrastructure obviously allows you to do these things. But in fact, today, given that there's public clouds, you could actually do this as a third party too. Host your compute in the public cloud, use their network, and then plug in your last mile infrastructure. So I don't think we're in a privileged position there.
You think that this is a theory I just came up with just now sitting here? You think that the ease and the cost efficiency of using the public cloud has created too many startups? You think that's one of the problems that one of the causes of all this?
No, I think there can
sort
never
of startup bubble that we're seeing.
I think there can never be enough startups, and I have said in the past that startups today have it too easy because we really spent our blood literally on the data center floor, racking and stacking stuff. This was the only alternative, and today you can push a button and you have another 100 virtual machines.
Right.
So I think that definitely has lowered the barrier to entry, and I think that's very, very good. Bubble or not, I think is a finance question. You know, what are the valuations? It's not my business.
Okay. Well, we can probably go on for longer, but we're out of time.
Yes.
So thank you, Urs.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you.